I'm 78 years old now, and my knees sound like creaking floorboards every time I stand. I live in this sprawling Victorian mansion in Portland, Oregon. Far too much house for one woman. And I've finally reached that age where doctors stop giving advice and start looking at you with that particular sadness, reserved for people running out of time. My name is Margaret. I met him in 1972 at a library benefit in downtown Seattle. I was 24, wearing bell-bottoms and carrying a dog-eared copy of Sylvia Plath. His name was Robert, and he was 28, dressed in what I would later learn was his uniform. Pressed khakis and a polo shirt that screamed safety. Robert was a tax attorney. If spreadsheets could breathe, they would have been Robert. I married him because I was young and terrified. My own childhood had been chaotic. My mother's boyfriends, my father's disappearances, the constant financial uncertainty. Robert felt like solid ground beneath my feet. He felt like I could finally stop holding my breath. My mother pulled me aside at the wedding and whispered, "Thank God you found someone responsible." Responsibility, such a pretty word for a cage. The truth I'm about to tell you is the one I've carried like a stone in my chest for 52 years. My marriage was the greatest tragedy of my life, not because it was cruel, but because it was so perfectly, suffocatingly adequate. Robert never raised his voice. He never was unfaithful. He simply and methodically suffocated every spontaneous impulse I ever had, with questions about practicality and risk assessment. When I turned 36, I discovered a vacant warehouse space in Pike Place Market. It had exposed brick, enormous windows facing the Sound, and it was affordable. I had been secretly saving money from selling my watercolor paintings at craft fairs, and I had enough to lease it for 2 years. I wanted to open a small bookstore and art collective, a place where writers and painters and musicians could gather and create something beautiful and unmarketable. I brought the idea to Robert on a Thursday evening. My hands were shaking. I had actually dreamed about this space. I could see it in my mind, completely formed and alive. Robert listened patiently, nodded thoughtfully, and then he did what he always did. He opened his laptop and spent 4 hours building a financial model that proved mathematically and irrefutably that the venture would fail. The foot traffic wasn't sufficient. The overhead was astronomical. The profit margins on art and literature were unpredictable. What about our retirement accounts? What about our security? By the time he finished his presentation, I felt foolish, reckless, childish for even suggesting such an impractical dream. We didn't lease the space. We invested that money in bonds. Conservative, sensible bonds that earned exactly 4.2% annually, just as Robert predicted. Here's what I'm ashamed to admit. I let him do it. I handed him the pen to my life because I was too frightened to hold it myself. Every time I wanted to crack open a window, Robert was there to warn me about the draft, and like an obedient child, I would close it again. I was so safe I could have screamed. Actually, I did scream, silently, inside my own mind, for decades. When I was 48, I woke up one morning with a desperate ache in my chest. I wanted to leave, not the marriage necessarily. I wasn't brave enough for that. I wanted to leave the country. I imagined renting out our house, buying a rail pass, and spending 6 months traveling through Italy, France, and Spain. I would rent small apartments in each city. I would eat pasta in Rome at midnight. I would sit in cafes in Paris and write. I would get intentionally lost on purpose. I presented this idea to Rebert at breakfast. He looked at me like I had suggested we commit fraud. He asked who would maintain the property. He worried about foreign healthcare systems. He asked, and I'll remember these words until I die, he asked, why would we spend our savings to be uncomfortable and jet-lagged in a foreign country when we have a perfectly climate-controlled home right here with everything we need? I didn't argue. I didn't say, because I am suffocating, because I am disappearing, because I am 48 years old and I haven't done a single brave thing in my entire life. I just poured him more coffee and swallowed my longing like a bitter pill. We had a daughter, Elena. She was the only place my love felt alive and unrestricted. I thought having a child would deepen my connection with Robert, would create some space for spontaneity and joy. It didn't. He parented the same way he lived, controlled, predictable, terrified of deviation. Elena is 47 now. She lives in Barcelona with a chaotic, brilliant photographer who makes her laugh until she cries. She calls me on Sundays from Spain, but she rarely comes home. When she was 22, leaving for Europe, she asked me point blank why I stayed. I couldn't answer her then. I knew I was fading by the time I was 40. I could feel myself becoming smaller, translucent, like I was slowly being erased with a pencil. But I didn't change anything because of the weight of accumulated compromise. We had the house. We had the joint bank account. We had the dinner parties where people referred to us as a unit. Robert and Margaret are such a solid couple. Most of all, I had the voice in my head. Robert's voice, but also my own mother's voice and my grandmother's voice, telling me that you don't rock the boat. You don't make waves. You endure. What a terrible word. I endured winters. I endured root canals. I should not have had to endure my only life. I played the role perfectly. I hosted elegant dinner parties. I ironed his shirts. I laughed at his dry jokes at the golf club. I methodically, deliberately erased myself until I was nothing more than a hollow outline of the woman I was supposed to become. By my 50s, I couldn't even remember what my own dreams felt like. They seemed like someone else's memory. The years piled up like snow. At 45, I thought I'd already invested 20 years of silence. Surely too much to change now. At 55, I thought we were too old to learn a new way of being together. At 65, I simply accepted that this was my life. This was the bargain I had made. Safety in exchange for freedom. Comfort in exchange for joy. Robert died 3 years ago. A heart attack on a Tuesday morning. Quick, painless, perfectly efficient. Just the way he would have orchestrated it. I stood at his funeral in my black dress, holding an umbrella I didn't need, waiting for the grief to crush me. I waited to collapse, but what I felt instead was a long, slow exhale. Relief. Not because I was happy he was gone. I loved him in a complicated, dusty way, but because the suffocating silence was finally broken. The pressure that had been sitting on my chest for 5 decades suddenly lifted. I could breathe. I could finally breathe. That evening, I walked into his perfectly organized home office. His leather chair, his mahogany desk, his filing system arranged with military precision. On the corner sat his beloved label maker, the same one he'd used for 50 years to organize every aspect of our lives. I picked it up, looked at it, and threw it directly into the garbage can. It was the most exhilarating thing I'd done in 5 decades. But the exhilaration curdled quickly into something worse. Regret. Not directed at Robert, but at myself. I'm angry, furious, that I'm 78 years old with a bank account full of well-managed money and a heart completely empty of memories. I don't have stories of getting lost in the rain in Rome. I don't have the beautiful mess of a failed bookstore to look back on with pride. I traded the terrifying adventure of living for financial security and a man who remembered to change the furnace filters. I made the safe choice, and safety has left me poor. I'm telling you this because I know who is listening. You are 42 or 55 or 63. You are sitting in your car in the driveway, delaying going inside for just 5 more minutes. You are lying awake at 2 a.m., feeling invisible next to the person you married. You are telling yourself it isn't that bad. You are making lists of their good qualities. Stop. Please stop. I'm not telling you to leave tomorrow. I'm not telling you to burn your life down. I'm telling you that you do not have to clip your own wings just because someone else prefers the dark. If your partner cannot imagine your dreams without immediately calculating the risks, let them calculate while you go build the thing anyway. I cannot get my 52 years back. They're gone, spent, swallowed by time and my own endless compromises. But you still have time. You have 30 years, maybe 40 if you're lucky. That's an entire lifetime. Do you really want to spend it tiptoeing through a house, discussing the weather and grocery lists? Take the trip alone. Paint the bedroom yellow. Write the book. Start the business. Stop asking permission to become yourself. Don't wait until you're a widow to throw away the label maker. Don't wait for retirement to remember what joy feels like. The plot twist is still possible. You still hold the pen. Write it now. Make your life your own. Please, don't wait.